Okay, so we asked for people to register some questions when they joined the webinar, and we've had one of the most popular ones that came in advance was on the data sharing, the incentives for data sharing, and in particular the concerns around privacy. And I know we've touched on this in some of the presentations already. I'm just wondering, perhaps, Lars, you did mention the fact that you have a central platform, and as Jenny and Mats are using more federated approaches. Maybe you could just talk to some of the decisions. Maybe I'll go to Lars first of all. I know you went into this already, but maybe some of the decisions around that, why you chose a central platform, and how you can guarantee, you were confident when you said it, but how can you guarantee that the patient privacy is respected?
Yeah, so we have come up with this platform that ensures that the data is protected by this de facto anonymization. So we work through an honest broker, so that's a trusted third party, so that each of the data contributors already has pseudonymized data only, and then the honest broker will do one additional step of pseudonymization and make sure that all personal identifiers are removed from the data sets, and then they go in this very secure data hub and platform. The advantage that we can look at the data ourselves once it was retrieved from the contributing partners is that we can do more thorough quality checks. And this is, I think, very important with regard to if you think of genomic and sequencing data. I'm not sure this can be done with the information that is currently available in electronic health records, right? Because I mean, there you can use the data that is in the health systems, but if you want to collect data that is not stored in one repository, if you wish, because the sequencing data comes from usually different databases than the clinical information or the patient-reported outcomes, for example, then this was the most appropriate way how we thought we should move forward. But of course, times are changing, and we are of course also open to link our platform in the future to approaches like the ones which we heard in the other two talks.
Thank you. Maybe there's a question in the chat that is addressed at Matt, but maybe I'll ask it more generally. And it's about, and I don't know if this is a limitation of perhaps the federated model. It's asking about whether you can use machine learning on this, and perhaps the idea of federated machine learning. I don't know if anyone feels they can address that question. I guess it's easier when you got a centralized platform which is under your control, but in the federated aspects.
My response would be sort of what we are working with together with Trinetics as one example of the federated platform. We can. There's one thing what you can do on a data cut where you can do the deep things, but one of my illustrations is that you can build models of the aggregated, de-identified results that you can get from the federated input from the federated hospitals, and then the opportunity to work with individual hospitals of testing those algorithms with their own deep data on the backend side. So I wouldn't say that the federated model is excluding opportunities to do the machine learning and AI algorithms. In the case of what I said, in the case of NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, I think there is opportunity to work with these hospitals to pressure test models, right, where from algorithms that should be generalizable. So there are pros and cons, but I would say that the current technology around structured data, which was the main talk on is that it's possible to do things, but of course, if you have the data, deep data, longitudinal data in a static way, or in a centralized way for that matter, of course, the power of doing algorithm is probably most likely to be more successful, right?
I suppose, yeah, what I was going to say is that I suppose it's about as you're talking about the external validation, and by running it in different centers with their different structures, you can actually also, it can bring to mind the differences and the similarities between data sets, between healthcare systems and between healthcare models, which enables you to then work on your question and really pick out why there are similarities or differences that then can kind of develop your research question. It does mean that you're reliant on your collaborators in those centres having the ability and capacity to run that machine learning or whatever analysis that you've designed within their centres. So you have less, not control, but it's kind of more of a collaborative, a group effort than if it were all centralised. And if, as Lars does, where you're looking at something that is quite rare, it may be difficult to then do something that is machine learning based in a federated model. If something is rarer and you're not going to see it individually. But I think for me, the beauty of a federated network analysis is that you're able to really robustly, not criticize, but you're constantly thinking about your question, the way you've designed your study and the elements within it, and you can compare and contrast the differences, and the differences are actually part of the beauty of it, because it allows you to be that critic of your research without it even going to peer review. You know, you're kind of reviewing it instantly.
I would like to take the opportunity very shortly to say that in defense of the federated technology, because it could be refined, many of these vendors are working with cloud-based solutions. So in the case of what I showed in Trinetics is that they have they can do advanced analytics services where you could do sophisticated analysis, where there is a temporary data cut, so to say, in the cloud that is out of reach for AstraZeneca researcher, but is automated and do propensity score matching. And when that analysis is done by using a de-identified aggregated data set that in normal cases we buy or acquire, and is done in the cloud, and after the analysis is deleted. So my point is that you can build and expand on federated technology and do more and more sophisticated things where you when you apply cloud-based solutions.
Thank you, Mats. I just want to let the audience know that if you are interested in federated learning, we have another project called Melody, which is not in the healthcare data space, it's more in the drug discovery space, but they're working on privacy preserving machine learning algorithms. I think Tertu mentioned this in their introduction, and it's a watch this space type project. Exciting things to come there. I want to move on to a question which we got a number of as well, which is on the role of patients. Obviously, we want the end result of all these projects to have a positive impact on patients. So first of all, I was wondering how you managed to ensure that patients are engaged within your projects so the results are of relevance to them. I know in particular for Harmony, this is quite important. But perhaps start with you, Lars, then, and then we can move on to the others.
Yeah, so we, as I had mentioned, we always had joint work package meetings for all the project designs. Patient advocates were involved, and then we also had this Harmony project that focuses not only on building up the platform and putting the data together, but also to come up with outcomes that are meaningful for all patients and for all the stakeholder groups with regard to hematologic malignancies. And there we had several very good kickoff meetings, which we still could do in presence in the prior COVID pandemic era. And what I learned there is that it's really important to work together quite a bit and to also educate on the one hand side the doctors, that they better understand or can still speak in a way that patients will understand us, but that we also have to educate the patient advocates, that they better understand what it means to design the platforms, that they understand about clinical trials, and because the problem is that the language is a different one which we speak. But during the Harmony project, it got better and better, and now we are in a very good situation where we're finalizing. We use Delphi surveys as a tool to come up with these outcomes, to define common outcomes that are relevant to all stakeholder groups. But it was very hard to get all the stakeholder groups speak the same language.
Thank you. What about Jenny, do you want to comment on how I mean, maybe perhaps not so much in the COVID one because that was quite an urgent case, but maybe in some of the other studies that you've run?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really highlights, there's kind of two elements really, isn't there? There's the data element, the use of electronic healthcare records or kind of pseudonymized, anonymized data. And there's also then looking at a project-specific patient engagement, so people with a specific condition and work that you're doing there. So some of the work that has happened on patient-specific conditions has been based upon priority setting partnerships that have already been established, where we know that there are needs of patients and patients that specifically want questions to be answered. That's certainly something that I'm doing in my my surgical real life. My other work that I'm doing within Eden at the moment, which is looking at musculoskeletal adverse effects of breast cancer treatments, has been based upon prior work looking at priority setting partnerships. But I think what this also highlights is how do we bring patients in on a generic level when we're talking about something that is very highly technical. It is quite abstract and it can feel quite separate from patient care, even though it's using patient data. You know, certainly some of the methodology that is used is difficult to talk to even with clinical colleagues and to kind of get that across. And I think that will be an area as we move forward, especially when there are more face-to-face elements that are enabled, you know, kind of post-pandemic, is to how to address that, and especially how to address that across, you know, across the EU and for obviously across globally, where there are different cultural implications of how data is used and how patients interact with healthcare. I think that's I'm not sure I have the answer there, but I would be really grateful to know if anyone has any thoughts, definitely, because it's really important.
Mm.
And perhaps one more comment, and sorry, an interesting observation to me was that the patients do not care so much about the security of their data, especially, I mean, with on one hand side with regard to cancer patients, but we were using for Harmony at the beginning data sets that already have been published. Right? We did start with a secondary use of data. So data that already had been published in a paper, you could download the full entire data set, and just reusing it for Harmony was a complete nightmare with regard to data protection rules, right? Because no one had signed an additional consent for the Harmony project specifically. And this is how we had to, but for the patients, they said, okay, the data is already out there. Everyone can look at it and use it. Why can you not use it at Harmony? Why do you have to complicate things, right? So they want their data, once they have signed the informed consent, be used for as many projects that can help other people. So this is, so, and I think with regard to harmonize data security policies across Europe, and there are some countries that are worse than others. The one where I come from, we have very strict data protection rules, which are not making our life easier with one. But I think there we also have to have them, and they can help here, I think, to make these analyses work across Europe better, or to use cloud solutions, right, which some countries also do not allow, depending on the laws. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have got a little bit of a provocative question here, which is, when you're setting up these sort of networks, what's the biggest problem? Is it going to be the technology, or is it the people? And I think, Lars, you're kind of addressing that to some extent already. But would others like to comment on that?
Should I comment, or is it Lars?
Go ahead, Matt, please.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of going back to the champion program that we launched after the EHR4CR project in order to build up the first cohort of 30 hospitals in Europe. It's not a technical thing. Of course, we had requirements for the hospitals that we thought were candidates, so that they should be research intensive, willing to recruit, and also having a high number of structured data in the EHRs, right? Sort of that requirements, and then the technology connection setup was not the large issue. Absolutely not. What took time, enormous time, was to convince stakeholders, them, on what's in it for them, and so on and so forth, and also local regulations and so on. And that's why the importance of having an accreditation program for the vendor at that time, that was the Insight platform, where we use the institute to being able for the vendor to say, yes, we have an institute, we have a third-party non-for-profit institute who can provide the driving license that this technology is secure and it's meeting all the GDPR aspects. That made a difference, and we thought that was a very important aspect, and it still is. So create the trust for hospitals and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
Maybe
if I may comment on that, I think the real challenge it is to find the common ground, and that is where we always look for. And then it's not a person or a people or an institution. It is how do we find the common ground where everybody understands what the win and the gain is, and what the contribution for the bigger picture, for the development of medicines, for the patients of the future and today. And I would say that I don't think anybody in this is, I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be here if you are against collaboration. I mean, then those people are not at the table. So with all of the goodwill and the best intentions, it is about finding a common ground and making sure that everybody has their part of their ambition recognized in the projects.
That's why I was talking about the Nash equilibrium, that makes sense and provide clear value demonstration for all stakeholders. And just to say one thing, when we connected one of the first hospitals in Europe in 2016, we asked after a while the R&D director why she thought it was good to have that technology installed. And we thought that one of the obvious, perhaps, value demonstration that hospital should be more visible, to be a candidate partner for doing clinical trials. But the answer was not that. It was that it enhanced the hospitals to improve quality in the EHR system. All right.
I think I would also add that it's my first real experience. I mean, I'm an early careers researcher, but of interacting between different institutions and people who have come from very different disciplines. So I've come at this from a clinical perspective, from an academic perspective, and this is my first real experience of working with people in industry, from government and regulatory, and people who are completely based in data. They are computer scientists, data scientists who are not clinicians. And I think what I have seen is the ability of a group to produce so much more by the mixing of those disciplines and adding to the blind spots that I have as a clinician, or the areas that they have less expertise in because they haven't had a direct patient contact at the same time. And I think that's the real benefit of this level of collaboration and this type of initiative, I suppose, where you're really getting everybody's strengths and you're pulling them together. I think that's been really amazing and something that I will definitely take forward into my work in future.
Okay, and just something else that's come up is obviously we're mostly here talking about electronic healthcare records that are, generated in routine care, which are obviously, as we mentioned at the top, very, very valuable, give great insights, but they're still, time stamped. They're only a series of time. And now, of course, people are wearing wearables all the time, smartphones all the time. You get this continuous data. And perhaps it's even messier than healthcare records. Can you see how this type of data can be used both in a kind of an academic research environment or even by the industry themselves to help inform their decision making? I bring this up. We have a number of IMI projects working on this area, which I'll mention in a minute. I'll let you guys go first.
Yes, if you go back to well, don't go back, but they're listed, and they're very many of the ongoing IMI projects are focused on exactly that. And I think it is an interesting journey again that we can only do together. And that's a bit of a lame answer probably, but it is because there is, as you say, so much data collected, and the real challenge is to to quantify what really matters to the patients. That's what I see at least in the way I think about this, that we can measure everything, but what does it really mean? And that is, as we talk about data and combining data and unlocking data in different platforms, what does it mean? And yes, collecting activity, daily steps, does it have what is the relevance? And again, then the voice of the patient for me becomes very important, because they are the ones for me to tell me what is relevant. Is it more relevant to be able to do 5,000 steps, or is it more relevant to not have pain getting out of a chair? And the fact that we can quantify these different elements will also make it possible to direct treatment developments to what really matters to the patients. And in that sense, I think the data that we are able to collect now in this high volume directly from the patient is, we haven't, I don't think we've even scratched the surface of the potential of it. But for me, the IMI projects that are ongoing are trying to make sense of that and identify what direction we could take with the treatments that are being developed.
I can go next. Yes, because we have an avalanche of new health data from sensors and wearables and so on. Doesn't mean that it will make an enormous difference. I'm rather conservative here, and I think it needs to be just building on what you were saying, and building on the right data with the in sufficient quality for the questions that we would like to answer. And I think that's the snag. And I think there's a risk that just because we have huge amount of health data or real world data, it will solve everything. Machine learning and algorithms needs to be validated towards the strong quality data that really, otherwise it would be a danger. So therefore, I think electronic health records will be still a very important gateway to provide that kind of validation platform of things, or registers, or other kind of data that we can rely on. Having said that, I do think, as one of my slides, that the right data that could be measured in a continuous, rich way could be a stepwise revolution for some indications and questions. But it is a careful path that one might need to go in order to make use of that.
What about Lars or Jenny, or clinicians? Are you finding ways to integrate some of this data into your clinical care yet? Is that on the agenda?
Yeah, no, it is, and it is definitely adding something. But I agree with Mats that we have to be careful. If the more data we have, that doesn't mean that we get more valuable information, and also it can introduce noise. But for example, with regard to treating cancer patients, I mean, if you have tools that, for example, give you feedback on how often patients use social networks, how much they move, and that can give you a much better feeling of if they are really doing well than answering a questionnaire after 4 weeks, where everyone might be afraid of stating the truth because he thinks perhaps then the cancer is not controlled so well if I really write how well I am. So I think you can get a much better picture. You will have the longitudinal aspect. It's a very helpful tool, and I think there artificial intelligence will also come in the future. That you have tools that ask the patients how they do, ask them questions every day, and if the performance is going down, perhaps then they get to see their doctor earlier than the others, and tools like that already have proven that they can improve overall survival in cancers. So I think it's definitely something which we will see more and more in the future, but we have to use it wisely. I agree with Mats.
Okay, we're getting towards the end. There's one key question I still want to ask, and that is, kind of the million-dollar question is, how can we be sure that the results of these really impact on the patient? So I think, Jenny, you gave a nice example of how your publication got picked up by the regulators and it made an impact, but how can we generalize that out to be sure that, you know, for example, Lars, your nice little video of the stratification, how is that going to feed through, translate through to actual real-life clinical care and benefit patients?
That's the billion-dollar question, indeed. Of course, we're also trying to publish. Yeah, Matt, perhaps you have a better, you have a good quick one.
Yeah, the federated EHR technology, it provides a much better design, and therefore we are getting the right patients for the right trial for the right disease. I think that is quite important. And that's just sort of reducing amendments and so on and so forth, but just getting the protocol right in the first place is important. And then, as we have used together with Sanofi when we run the EHR to EDC project as a continuum of the EHR for CR project, one of the interesting value proposition which came from one of the hospital partners was that if we can get this introduced, it will allow research studies to be conducted that otherwise would never be, because they will be too costly.
Yeah, and maybe, of course, the ultimate, or one of the, it's not the ultimate, but one of the major milestones is, of course, regulatory approval of the data and the dossiers. And I think a very recent example of the Trials at Home initiative that is today ongoing in IMI 2 is that there is a decentralized trial setup, and the team went to seek advice from the European Medicine Agency, and it turned out that different companies had that same conversation about decentralization of trials with the IMA, where there was an average of about 10 to 20 attendees, while Trials at Home, the IMI project, came to discuss things with the IMA, and there were over 80 participants. So for me, the fact that this combined effort under the IMI initiative is powerful and makes it possible to really move the needle in the collaborative effort was, I think, a really good sign of how we can make these innovations really benefit the patients sooner rather than later with this consortium approach. Sorry.
Thank you. Anyone else want to pick up on this?
No, I think both speakers summarized it very nicely. And we already are talking to EMA. I think this is important to have the regulatory bodies involved. Yeah.